the slow and steady increases in people's, in addiction rates and mental health issues, and also that's also coincident with the exporting of jobs from the American domestic sector, the American domestic manufacturing sector. So all these companies that used to produce in the U.S. have to now move offshore, and all the dollars that would normally just go and circulate domestically now will circulate to offshore manufacturers who circulate it with their offshore suppliers to allow these companies to get dollars to use for global trade. And so the system is set up basically to hollow out the U.S. and pump up U.S. financial assets, forever. Wow. This is Triffin's dilemma, and this is just the effects of it coming home to roost.
And then eventually do we get into a position where we can no longer serve adequately as the global reserve currency?
Absolutely, yeah.
And how do those transitions occur then? Is it typically through war? That's how the last one occurred, right?
Absolutely.
So would we expect war to be a natural function of this phenomenon? At the point the global reserve currency stops functioning properly, that there has to be some conflict to establish who the new one will be?
I think so. I actually have a unique view on this. I think I don't think it'll be a war in the sense that most people think. I don't think that China will be sending aircraft carriers across the ocean, invading the U.S. and stripping us of our global hegemony overnight because of an invasion. I think the most likely scenario is just a slow global decoupling from the U.S. dollar, starting with U.S. Treasuries, which we've already started to see also, by the way, and then a switch into a new reserve currency, and the U.S. Basically pulling a Suez Canal, which is where the British tried to enforce their own hegemony in Egypt in the early 1950s and force Egypt to open the Suez Canal and let British ships through, and basically allow a British corporation to retain control of the Suez. And the British were not able to do it, and they had to call on the U.S., and the U.S. didn't want to support the British in their operation. And over the course of 2 weeks, the Egyptians were able to kick out the Brits, and the Brits were. It was like a watershed moment where they basically woke up and said, "Oh my God, there's the global reserve currency anymore. We're not the global hegemon. We can't do what we want." And I think that's more likely, right? I think we'll have a war one day where we show up to fight, and we expect all our allies to come, gather their banners, and no one shows up, and we're like, what?
Yeah.
And then we're just like, okay, now we're really alone.
And then what? And is there then a scramble to be the next? How do you then establish what the next global reserve currency will be, or is it just unknown? How would you see that playing out? If it's not because the last one was U.S. wins World War II.
Yeah.
U.S. holds Bretton Woods Conference. U.S. rewrites the global banking order and says U.S. dollar is now the global reserve currency, basically. If it's not going to be that type of process, how would we reestablish the next global reserve currency?
So I think
will there not be one, perhaps?
I think it'll be. I think there has to be for the global economy to function in the way that it needs to in the modern day. So in the previous times of transition between global reserve currencies, there was usually a clear contender that was coming up next. Right, there was a clear, strong contender that had structural advantages compared to the last reserve currency, and that's usually what happens. Is what helps the next reserve currency come in is not only a quote unquote strong contender that is a nation state that has rising population, rising military force, growing economy, et cetera, but it also has structural advantage. There are reasons to buy this currency and to use this currency over the previous one. And so, for example, when we switched from the Dutch guilder to the British pound. The Brits were a much better military force. They had, much better seafaring capabilities. The Dutch were obviously experienced traders, but they didn't have the military force to back up their economic might. They were just too small. And the Brits were the first ones to come in and be like, okay, we have the same ship technology as you and the cannons, but we have a way bigger navy. And now we can actually enforce it with our martial law, right? Yeah. And then the U.S. obviously was a clear contender, and the dollar was a clear contender after World War II. And so during this next cycle, I think ironically, there's no clear contender. China can't be a global reserve currency because they need to be net exporters of their own currency, which they can't do because they are still a export based economy. Russia can't do it because Russia only has one export. They're not diversified, and also, like we said, they're a net exporter. So they would need to be a lot stronger of a consumer based economy to be a global reserve currency. And there's really no other countries outside of China and maybe Russia that could even become close to contend. And so what people have been theorizing for the last few years is BRICS. Could a coalition of these countries? Okay, so Russia can't do it. China can't do it. China's like a closed capital account and severe monetary restrictions on their own people. They can't have a free and open flow of capital. So let's have a coalition of these countries come together, and they'll create a commodity-backed currency that will be the next global reserve.
What was that? Brazil, Russia, India, China,
and South Africa.
Yeah.
And last year, BRICS conference expanded to like 16 new members.
Okay.
6 of them were admitted. Argentina was one of them, was trying to get admitted, but Javier Milei, axed that. So Argentina's not a member, but they have they have several new members, and they're trying to switch into this. They're trying to theoretically create this competitor to the dollar.
Wow.
But the issue is, as you can imagine, with all the problems with creating global reserve currency, it's hard enough as a single nation. Imagine trying to do this between 6 nations or 5 nations. Yeah, exactly.
Right, yeah.
Exactly. And the issue is it's the same thing with the Eurozone. If you create a single currency and a single monetary policy, and you have different nation states that have different needs, different economies, different rates of spending, different rates of inflation, one country needs to ease while another needs to tighten. How are you going to do that? And if you're going to back it by commodities, if you don't trust the U.S. and the Fed and the gold at Fort Knox, if you don't trust that we have the gold, how much less would you trust that China has the gold or Russia has the gold that they say that they would have to back their currency? So I agree with a lot of other macro people that it's kind of a pipe dream. It's kind of this wishful thinking that BRICS could actually create a competitive currency, because the problems involved with creating a commodity currency in the 21st century would just be insurmountable, and people's trust in it wouldn't be high enough, which is why I think that Bitcoin is truly the only real contender.
That sounds like Byzantine generals' problem in a way, that this coalition, these actors are just inherently antagonistic, so they can't really get along and get it done. And in Byzantine generals' problem, computer science problem, long unsolved prior to Bitcoin. Bitcoin, I think, is the only solution to that problem that I know of. So is that why Bitcoin is a solution in your mind? Because you can't do it in the coalition format?
That's really great you say that. That's one of the reasons, and I never even realized that until you literally said that. That's